Do you remember your very first job? That fragile moment when you thought the world was opening its doors and adulthood was finally yours to claim. For me, it all collapsed after just one sick day. One phone call, one betrayal, and suddenly my so-called future came crashing down. This is not just a story about a job. It's about trust, lies, and the painful truth of growing up in America's small towns. I was 18 years old when I walked into that little shop on the corner of Main Street. The kind of place you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. My town wasn't exactly famous for anything. No shiny skyscrapers, no bustling nightlife. Just a faded collection of brick buildings. A diner that still smelled like grease from the 70s, and a convenience store that seemed older than my dad. It was the kind of town where everyone knew your name, and gossip traveled faster than the morning paper. Landing my first job felt like winning a lottery ticket, even if it was just 3 days a week at a shop so quiet it could have doubled as a library. I remember the nervous thrill that came with my first paycheck. Holding that slip of paper, barely $100, I felt like I'd finally crossed some invisible line between being a kid and being well, something closer to an adult. The store itself wasn't glamorous. 4 aisles, one squeaky ceiling fan that always clicked on the 3rd rotation, and a register that beeped like it was protesting every time you pressed a key. When you worked a shift there, you worked alone. No co-workers to banter with, no boss watching from the back. Just you, the silence, and the occasional customer drifting in like TUMBLEWED. It should have felt boring, maybe even depressing, but for me, it felt like freedom. For the first time, I had a place where no teacher was barking instructions, no parent was checking my curfew. Just me, in charge of the store, in charge of myself. At 18, that meant everything. I still remember the smell of the place cleaner mixed with stale chips, faint perfume from the air freshener someone had stuck in the corner. The shelves weren't always full, but I'd line up the products like soldiers, straightening labels until they all faced forward. It was silly, I know. Customers probably didn't care if the cereal boxes stood at perfect attention. But I did. It was my little way of showing the world, I belong here. I can do this. Every shift, I'd clock in, set my bag under the counter, and listen to the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights. Sometimes the stillness made me restless, like I was trapped in a fishbowl. Other times, I'd find comfort in it, like the store itself was teaching me how to sit with my own thoughts. I didn't realize then how fragile that peace was, how quickly it could shatter. At 18, you think the world is fair. You think if you work hard, smile, and follow the rules, people will notice. People will reward you. That was the lie I carried with me into every shift, right up until the day everything unraveled. The first few shifts were almost dreamlike, in the way small victories can feel enormous when you're 18. I wasn't saving lives, I wasn't making big money, but every time I locked up at night and jingled those heavy brass keys in my pocket, it felt like I owned a piece of the world. The routine settled in quickly. Clock in, wipe down the counters, sweep the floor, even if no one had stepped inside all day. Check the shelves for items that might be close to expiration, though in a shop like ours, everything felt a little expired already. Still, I treated every dented can like it mattered, because in that tiny space, it did. And then there were the customers. Each one was like a character wandering onto my personal stage. Mr. Alvarez, the retired mechanic, came in every Wednesday at 3 sharp for his pack of cigarettes and a newspaper, always grumbling about how the town's going to hell. Mrs. Parker, who smelled like lavender and wore more jewelry than anyone else in town, bought the same cheap bottle of red wine twice a week. She'd wink at me like we shared a secret no one else knew. And the kids, oh, the kids. Groups of middle schoolers with sticky fingers and wide eyes, pooling together loose change for candy bars. Half the time, they left more wrappers on the floor than money in the till. Each face, each moment, carved itself into the rhythm of my days. Sometimes I'd imagine I was a bartender in one of those old movies. Except instead of pouring drinks, I was selling potato chips and soda. The truth. I loved it. Not the job itself, maybe, but the independence it represented. The silence was another character altogether. Working alone meant hours without a single voice, just the hum of the cooler and the buzz of the lights. In those hours, I thought about everything my future. College applications I hadn't finished, the friends I was starting to drift away from, the version of myself I hoped to become, and yet, when someone finally did walk through the door, I straightened up like an actor waiting for his cue. "Hey, how's it going?" I'd say, my voice carrying more cheer than I felt, because that was part of the job, making people believe the store was alive, even when it wasn't single quotes. At the end of my first week, my boss stopped by to check the books. He wasn't the kind of man who smiled much, but when he looked over the register tape and glanced at the spotless floor, I caught the faintest nod of approval. "You're doing fine," he said. Simple words, but for me they were fireworks. Doing fine meant I wasn't messing up. Doing fine meant I belonged here, and for a kid just stepping into adulthood, belonging is everything. I carried that nod with me into the following weeks. I started staying a few minutes late to tidy the shelves, making sure every can lined up perfectly, every bag of chips faced forward. Nobody told me to. Nobody cared, probably, but it mattered to me. That was the irony of it. Ali was trying so hard to be seen in a place where almost no one was looking. Asterisk. It didn't take long before I started to believe I was more than just doing fine. Every shift ended the same way. I'd wipe down the counter, bag up the trash, and wait for whoever was scheduled to relieve me. That moment, the exchange between one worker and the next was the closest thing we had to camaraderie. No overlapping hours, no long conversations in the back room. Just a passing of the torch, 5 minutes where two strangers pretended to be teammates. And in those 5 minutes, I was showered with praise. "Wow, the store looks amazing," one of the girls said as she came in one evening, her eyes sweeping over the neatly lined shelves. "Seriously, you did all this?" Another time, a guy I barely knew stepped behind the counter, glanced around, and let out a low whistle. "Man, you make it look easy. Everything's spotless. Wish I had your work ethic." Every compliment felt like fuel. I carried their words home like trophies, repeating them in my head as I lay in bed at night. They see me. They notice what I'm doing. It wasn't just the co-workers either. A customer once muttered, "This place looks better than it used to," tossing a crumpled dollar on the counter before shuffling out. He probably forgot the comment 5 seconds later, but I replayed it for days. The illusion was powerful. I started to think maybe I wasn't just another high school graduate stuck in a dead-end shop. Maybe I was the kind of person who could rise above, who could take a nothing job and make it something. Maybe just maybe, this was the first step toward proving myself. And here's the thing about being 18. You cling to every scrap of validation like it's oxygen. You're desperate to believe you matter, to believe you're not invisible. When someone tells you you're doing a great job, you don't question it to inhale it. Let it fill your lungs, and float on it for as long as you can. So I floated, shift after shift, praise after praise. I convinced myself I was building a reputation, that my boss noticed, that my co-workers respected me, that my parents, who didn't really understand what the job was, would one day look at me and think, he's responsible now. He's a man. The store became more than a paycheck. It was my stage, my little kingdom. I wasn't just straightening cans anymore. I was performing. Each neatly folded chip bag was proof that I was worth something. Each mopped floor was an argument against every doubt I'd ever had about myself. And when I locked up at night, the keys heavy in my hand, I didn't just feel like an employee, I felt like a protector. Like I was guarding something fragile and important, something no one else could see. It's almost funny, looking back, how easily I bought into the illusion. How desperately I wanted the praise to be real, because the truth was already out there, hiding in text messages and whispered conversations, waiting for the day it would find me. But back then, in those first golden weeks, I believed. And that belief was enough to keep me showing up 3 days a week, carrying the weight of a dream that wasn't really mine. For a while, everything felt solid. My little kingdom held together. The shelves stayed neat. The customers left with their sodas and candy. And I walked out each night with my chest a little higher. But cracks, real cracks, don't announce themselves with explosions. They whisper. They creep. They show up in the smallest, most forgettable moments. The first time, it was something simple. A candy shipment came in late, and I stayed an extra 40 minutes after my shift to put it all away. The next morning, I found half the shelves already ransacked, whole rows of chocolate bars gone. At first, I thought maybe we'd sold them, but the register told a different story, numbers that didn't add up, transactions missing. I told myself it was a mistake. Maybe I'd counted wrong. Maybe the truck had shorted us. I wanted to believe that, because believing anything else meant admitting the kingdom I'd built wasn't really mine at all. Then came the whispers. I'd clock in for my shift, and sometimes catch the tail end of a conversation. Co-workers huddled near the freezer door, their voices low, cutting off the moment I appeared. Their eyes lingered on me just a beat too long before they smiled. Not a friendly smile, but the kind that said, "We know something you don't." It gnawed at me, and the compliments, the ones I'd lived on, started to sound different. A little too cheerful, a little too rehearsed. Like they weren't praising me, but distracting me, feeding me lines so I wouldn't look too closely at what was happening behind the curtain. One night, as I was sweeping near the back, I heard a burst of laughter. Real, sharp laughter. The kind people can't hold back. It came from the break room, and I froze mid-step. Broom handle pressed against my chest. They were laughing about me. I couldn't hear the words, just my name tossed into the air like a punchline. I wanted to storm in, demand to know what was so funny. But I didn't. I just stood there, rooted, my face hot, my throat dry. When they came out, one of them clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Man, you're killing it out there." And I smiled. I smiled, because what else was I supposed to do? That's the thing about cracks. Sometimes you see them, sometimes you just feel them under your fingertips. But once they're there, you can't unfeel them. I started noticing other things too. A carton of cigarettes missing, but no sale logged. A kid I recognized from school walking out with more in his backpack than he'd paid for. And the worst part, no one seemed to care. My boss didn't mention it. My co-workers didn't mention it. It was like I was the only one who noticed. Or maybe the only one who wasn't supposed to. Late at night, lying in bed, the doubts came. What if the praise isn't real? What if they're just humoring me, covering something up? I'd replay their words, their looks, their laughter. The illusion was still there, but now it had hairline fractures, like glass ready to shatter if I pushed too hard. I didn't push. I told myself I was overthinking, that I was paranoid, that being 18 meant not knowing how the world really worked, and this was just part of growing up. But deep down, I knew something was wrong, and one day soon, those whispers, those missing items, those forced smiles, they wouldn't stay hidden in the cracks. They'd come crashing down all at once. Asterisk. It happened on a Wednesday. Funny how disasters always pick the most ordinary days where nothing's supposed to happen, where you're just going through the motions, expecting the script to play out the way it always does. I was halfway through my shift. The store dead quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator units. I was restocking shelves with chips, dragging my feet a little. My stomach was still tender from a bout of food poisoning that had knocked me flat a few days earlier. That's when the phone rang. I wasn't supposed to answer it. The landline was mainly for managers, for deliveries, for things bigger than me. But in that moment, I was the only one there, so I picked it up. Hello, Midtown Convenience. Silence. Then, a voice I recognized but had never heard so sharp before. My boss, is your father home? My chest went cold. I almost dropped the receiver. No. It's me, I said. I'm at work. There was a pause, a heavy pause that felt like judgment itself. Well, let him know, the voice said, clipped, irritated. This is your last chance. You've been sloppy. Customers complaining. The place is a mess every time you leave. If it happens again, you're done. I just stood there, the phone sweating against my ear. My brain scrambled, trying to line up the words. A mess. Customers complaining. That couldn't be right. Just that morning, the girl on the next shift had grinned at me and said, "Man, this place looks perfect." She'd given me a thumbs up, like always. They all did. Wait, what do you mean? I finally stammered. I thought I was. Don't play dumb, my boss snapped. You've had enough warnings. Last chance. Then the line went dead. I stayed there, holding the phone long after the click. My hand shook. Warnings. Last chance. No one had said a word to me. Not one criticism. Not one hint that something was wrong. Just smiles, compliments, laughter. I wasn't supposed to hear it hit me then, like a weight slamming into my chest, that all those smiles had been fake. Every good job, every looks great in here had been a lie. A performance. And while they were smiling to my face, they were stabbing me in the back, reporting to my boss that I was failing, that I was dragging the store down. I felt sick. Not the kind of sick you can sleep off, but the kind that sits in your stomach and burns. I wanted to believe there'd been a mistake, that my boss had confused me with someone else. But deep down, I knew. This was the truth slipping through the cracks I'd been ignoring. I spent the rest of my shift in a haze, scanning items for customers without hearing their words, moving through the aisles like a ghost. I could see myself from the outside 18, hunched, pale, a kid pretending to be a man, trying not to fall apart in the middle of a convenience store. When my replacement arrived, she smiled. Same smile as always. Too wide, too sweet. "Wow, the store looks amazing," she said, and this time I didn't smile back. I just stared at her, trying to see through the mask, because now I knew what lived behind that smile. After that phone call, nothing felt the same. The store that once felt like my stage, my little kingdom, turned into a trap. Every corner, every shelf, every mirror felt like it was watching me. I started second-guessing everything. Was that chip bag crooked, or was I just imagining it? Did I sweep the floor enough, or would someone walk in after me and say it looked dirty? I'd wipe the counter 3 times, then circle back to do it again, just in case. My hands moved constantly, polishing, straightening, restocking, like I could scrub away the invisible judgment pressing down on me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't silence the voice in my head. They're lying to you. They're all lying to you. The paranoia followed me home. At dinner, I'd sit across from my dad, stabbing at my food, waiting for him to drop the hammer. Because if my boss had called him once, he could call again. He could tell him everything. And in my father's eyes, I'd go from responsible young man to embarrassment of the family in a heartbeat. Every vibration of my phone made my chest seize. Was it another warning? Another last chance? I stopped sleeping. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every shift in my head like a broken tape. The smiles, the laughter behind closed doors, the compliments that now sounded like mockery. I could almost hear them texting my boss after I left. He missed a spot. He forgot this. He's messing it all up again. And the worst part, I had no proof. If I confronted them, they'd just smile. If I asked my boss, he'd just repeat what he'd already said. You're on thin ice. I was trapped between what I saw and what I felt, gaslit into doubting my own eyes, my own reality. The store wasn't quiet any. Marit was suffocating. The silence pressed against my ears until the smallest sounds made me flinch. The hum of the fridge, the ding of the doorbell when a customer walked in, the shuffle of footsteps behind me. Each sound carried weight, like it was part of some hidden conversation I wasn't meant to hear. I found myself watching my co-workers the way they had watched me. When they came in to replace me, I lingered an extra minute, pretending to fix something near the register, just to see their faces. The moment I turned to leave, their expressions softened into something else. Not relief, exactly. Not anger, either. Something colder. Like they couldn't wait for me to be gone so the real work could begin. It felt like being locked out of a secret. Everyone knew the rules except me. Everyone knew the truth except me. I tried to tell myself it was just stress, just the growing pains of having my first real job. But deep down, I knew this wasn't normal. This wasn't just work. This was war, and the battlefield was silence, whispers, and smiles that didn't reach the eyes. I wasn't just alone, I was being isolated, piece by piece, until the only voice I could hear was my own. And even that voice was starting to turn against me. It was a Friday night, the kind of shift where time drags like molasses. The store was quiet, the town outside even quieter. I had been on edge all week, waiting for something, anything, to break the tension that was coiling tighter inside me with each passing hour. And then it happened. Around 9 o'clock, a man walked in. Middle-aged, scruffy, the kind of customer who normally just grabbed a soda and left. But this time he lingered, scanning the shelves, muttering under his breath. I watched him from behind the counter, nerves prickling. He came up with a candy bar and a pack of gum. I rang him up, tried to smile, tried to be the good employee, but he sneered at me. "You kids don't know how to run a store," he said, voice sharp enough to cut. I froze. My hand clamped down on the register like it was the only thing keeping me upright. "Excuse me. This place is always a mess," he continued. "Price is wrong. Shelves empty. Trash out front. You call this work?" His words hit me harder than they should have. Maybe because they echoed everything I feared was true, everything I'd been told behind my back. My stomach churned, my throat burned. "I keep it clean," I stammered. "I make sure everything," but he just laughed, a cruel, dismissive laugh, tossed a crumpled bill onto the counter and walked out. The bell above the door jingled like a taunt. I stood there, the candy bar still in my hand, my chest heaving, my vision blurred with rage and humiliation. All the whispers, all the fake smiles, all the lies, they crashed into me at once, and I snapped. I slammed the register shut so hard it rattled. I kicked the broom, leaning by the counter, sent it clattering to the floor. What do they want from me? I shouted into the empty store. My voice echoed back at me, hollow and pathetic. I dropped to the floor, hands over my face, trying to breathe. But I couldn't. The walls felt like they were closing in. I was 18, alone, breaking down in a convenience store that wasn't even mine. That was my breaking point. Not the phone call. Not the fake smiles. This, being told, to my face, what I'd feared all along, that I wasn't good enough, that no matter what I did, no matter how many times I cleaned the shelves, I would never measure up. And I realized, with a kind of sick clarity, that maybe I wasn't meant to. Maybe the whole game was rigged from the start. By the time my shift ended, I was wrecked. My hands still shook as I locked the door behind me. The night air was cool, but it felt heavy, pressing down on me as I walked home. I didn't want to go inside. Didn't want to see my dad. Didn't want to hear him ask how work was. So I sat on the porch for nearly an hour, staring at the dark street, trying to piece myself back together. But of course, I couldn't avoid it forever. The moment I stepped in, my father's voice cut through the silence. Boss called again. My stomach dropped. He said, "This is it. You either straighten up or you're done. He's giving you one last chance." I wanted to scream, to tell him it wasn't true, that the co-workers were lying, that the whole thing was twisted against me, but the words stuck in my throat. Because what proof did I have? Nothing. Just paranoia, whispers, and a candy bar still burning in my memory. So I just nodded, stood there, silent, while my father shook his head in disappointment. "You were doing so well," he muttered. "I thought you were finally growing up." That cut deeper than anything my boss or co-workers had said. I went to my room and closed the door, but the walls weren't thick enough to hold back the weight of his words. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. The kingdom was gone. The illusions were gone. All that was left was me, an 18-year-old kid with a job hanging by a thread. A father who thought he was failing, and a truth he couldn't prove. That night, I realized something terrifying. It wasn't just about losing the job anymore. It was about losing myself. The next morning, I woke up with a decision already carved into me. I wasn't going to let them win. I might have been 18, scared and hanging on by a thread, but I wasn't about to roll over and let my first real job end in humiliation. If this was my last chance, then I was going to fight for it every second, every shift, every breath. So I became obsessed. The moment I stepped into the store, I worked like a machine. Shelves weren't just stocked, they were squared, every label perfectly facing forward. Counters weren't just wiped, they gleamed, shining under the fluorescent lights. I swept the floor until the broom bristles frayed, then did it again, just to make sure. Customers noticed. At least, I thought they did. A few nodded politely, muttered a thanks, even smiled as they walked out with their groceries. Every one of those reactions became fuel, proof that I was doing something right. But paranoia clung to me like a shadow. Every time a coworker walked in to relieve me, I studied their faces like I was decoding a secret message. Was their smile genuine, or was it another mask? Were they already texting the boss behind my back, reporting some flaw I hadn't even seen yet? I started keeping lists, on scraps of receipt paper, on napkins. On the back of the schedule taped to the wall, I wrote down everything I did. Floors swept at 3:15, trash emptied at 4:02, candy shelf reorganized at 5:10, as if documenting it all could save me. As if proof on paper could fight back against whispers. But the more I fought, the more invisible the enemy became. A soda can misplaced after a customer left suddenly felt like sabotage. A gum wrapper under the counter, something I'd mislooked, like a planted trap. I couldn't tell where my mistakes ended and where their lies began. And then there was my father. He didn't yell again. Not right away, but his silence weighed heavier than shouting ever could. Every time I walked through the door, I felt his eyes scanning me, searching for signs of failure. At dinner, he'd ask, "How was work?" in a tone that already assumed the answer. I'd force a smile, say fine, then excuse myself early. Because, what could I tell him? That his son was trapped in a silent war he couldn't prove existed. That grown adults were smiling to his face and stabbing him in the back as soon as he left. No, to him, it would just sound like excuses. So I kept it all inside, day by day. Shift by shift, I poured every ounce of myself into that store. Not for the paycheck, not even for the job, but because losing meant they were right. Losing meant I was exactly what they thought I was. Sloppy, weak, replaceable. I couldn't let that be my story, so I fought. I fought with every broom sweep, every shelf I straightened, every fake smile I returned. But here's the thing about fighting shadows. You can swing until your arms give out, but you'll never land a punch. And deep down, I knew. Sooner or later, something was going to give. Asterisk. It was bound to happen. You can only smile through gritted teeth for so long before the mask cracks. That night, I was halfway through my shift when the doorbell chimed and in walked one of my coworkers, Jamie. She was always the cheerful one. Always handing out those empty compliments like candy. "Wow," she said, tossing her bag behind the counter. "The store looks amazing, as usual." Normally, I'd force a smile, nod, maybe mumble a thanks. But not this time. Something in me snapped. I dropped the rag I'd been holding and turned to face her. "Cut the crap," I said. Her smile froze, still plastered on her face, but not reaching her eyes. What do you mean? You know what I mean? My voice shook, not from fear, but from months of swallowing words that now came spilling out. You walk in here every night, telling me how great the place looks, how I'm doing everything right. And then you run off and tell the boss I'm screwing it all up. Jamie blinked, her smile faltering. Don't lie to me. I shouted, louder than I meant to. The hum of the refrigerators seemed to vanish, leaving only my voice bouncing off the walls. I've heard what he says. I know what's going on. You all smile in my face and then stab me in the back. Why? What did I do? For a second, the mask slipped. Her eyes hardened, her lips pressed tight, and I saw the truth behind the smile. You don't get it, she said, her voice low now, sharp. It's not about you doing everything wrong. It's about you thinking you're untouchable. You're just some kid playing manager in a store you don't own. The words stung worse than I thought they could. I never said I doesn't matter, she cut in. The boss doesn't trust you. None of us do. You're lucky to even have this job. For a moment, I just stood there, fists clenched at my sides, heat rushing to my face. The silence between us stretched, thick and heavy. Finally, I whispered, then why smile at all? Why pretend? Jamie shrugged, that fake smile creeping back onto her face like it had never left. Because it's easier that way. And just like that, she walked past me, grabbed the broom, and started sweeping. Like the conversation had never happened. But for me, nothing was the same that night. The truth was laid bare. The smiles weren't just lies. They were weapons, and I was the target. After that night with Jamie, nothing in the store felt the same. Her words played on repeat in my head. You're just some kid. You're lucky to even have this job. At first, I tried to push back harder. If they wanted perfection, I'd give them perfection. I scrubbed the counters until my knuckles bled. I counted inventory 3 times over. I cleaned the trash bins until they looked brand new. But no matter what I did, the whispers got louder in my head. I'd imagined Jamie texting the boss. He missed a spot. He didn't mop right. He's slipping again. I became paranoid about everything. If a customer lingered too long in an aisle, I wondered if they were spying on me. If a co-worker glanced at the register when they came in, I was sure they were checking my mistakes. Even the ringing of the landline made me jump. Convinced it was my boss calling with yet another final warning, sleep vanished completely. I'd lie awake, replaying every shift, every detail, every mistake I might have made. By morning, my body was heavy, my eyes bloodshot, but I still dragged myself to the store, because missing one shift could mean the end. And in the middle of all this chaos, my dad loomed larger than ever. His silence, his disappointment, his eyes that seemed to ask, why can't you just get it right? I avoided him, stayed in my room, ate in silence, did everything I could not to face him. Because I wasn't just failing at work anymore. I was failing at being his son. I could feel myself unraveling. Every smile from a co-worker looked faker. Every compliment sounded like mockery. Every laugh I overheard felt like it was about me. And the worst part, I started believing them. Believing maybe I really was sloppy, worthless, replaceable. That maybe I wasn't cut out for the job or for adulthood at all. The spiral wasn't just about the store anymore. It was about me. My whole identity was cracking, and I knew it was only a matter of time before everything collapsed. The collapse came on a night like any other. The store was empty. silent except for the buzz of the fluorescent lights. I was standing behind the counter, staring at the register, my hands trembling for no reason at all. Then the landline rang. I froze. My chest tightened. I didn't want to answer, but I had to. With shaking hands, I picked it up. Hello. It was my boss. His voice cold, sharp. This isn't working out. Just like that. No explanation. No second chances. No fake smiles to soften the blow. You're done. The line went dead. I stood there, the receiver pressed to my ear, hearing nothing but the hum of static. My body went numb. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone, to break something, anything, but all I could do was laugh. A hollow, broken laugh that sounded nothing like me, because after everything, the extra hours, the obsessive cleaning, the sleepless nights, it had all been for nothing. They'd already decided. The game had been rigged from the start. When my shift ended, I didn't even lock the door. I just walked out, leaving the lights on, the shelves half stocked, the broom still lying on the floor. For the first time in weeks, I didn't care. Walking home, the night air hit me like a wave. I should have felt free, but I didn't. I felt empty. Like I'd lost more than just a job. At home, my father was waiting. His face said it all before he even opened his mouth. Disappointment, anger, maybe even shame. What happened? He demanded. I couldn't answer. I just stood there, hollow, broken, unable to explain the war I'd been fighting alone. Because how do you explain to someone that you weren't fired for being bad at the job, but for being trapped in a game you never had a chance of winning? That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized something terrifying. It wasn't the job I'd lost, it was myself. The morning after I lost the job, I woke up to a silence that felt heavier than any words my father could have said. The store was gone from my life, but its shadow lingered in every corner of my small room. The hum of the fridge downstairs, the ticking clock, even the sunlight creeping through the blinds, they all reminded me of what I had lost, of the fight I had already lost. I didn't get out of bed right away. I stayed under the covers, staring at the ceiling, letting the weight of failure press me down. My stomach ached, my chest felt hollow, and my mind spun in a loop. I tried. I worked hard. I wasn't enough. I wasn't enough. Eventually, I forced myself up. Had to eat. Had to breathe. Had to face my father, even if it felt impossible. At breakfast, he didn't yell. He just looked at me, eyes heavy, disappointment still written in every line of his face. You tried, he said softly. That's something, but you have to understand, life won't wait for you to catch up. I nodded, barely able to meet his gaze. His words were meant to comfort, but all I heard was the echo of "you failed." I spent the day wandering the town aimlessly, replaying every moment from the store. The smiles, the compliments, the whispers, the final call from my boss, they all collided in my head, forming a montage of humiliation and betrayal. But then, amid the spiral of self-loathing, a tiny spark appeared. A thought, maybe this isn't the end. Maybe it's just a beginning. I thought about the things I had learned, strange as it seemed. I had learned resilience, attention to detail, patience, even in the face of lies. I had learned the bitter taste of betrayal and the weight of responsibility, and most importantly, I had learned something about myself. I could survive this. I had survived it. That night, I opened my laptop for the first time in weeks and started jotting down ideas. A plan, not a rigid plan, not a plan that guaranteed success, but a start. Small steps, applying for another job, maybe something less toxic, reaching out to a friend, figuring out a way to regain trust in myself. It didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the months of paranoia, the sleepless nights, or the humiliation. But it reminded me that life didn't end because one battle was lost. That sometimes the hardest part of growing up was realizing you'd been fighting the wrong war and then choosing to fight the right one. I went to bed that night feeling lighter, almost. Not victorious, not healed, but awake, alert, ready to begin again, because the pieces I had left, broken as they were still mine. And for the first time, I believed I could put them back together. The next few weeks were awkward, uncomfortable, and honestly, a little humiliating. I sent out resumes, filled out online applications, and tried to muster the courage to step into new stores, new workplaces, places where no one knew the story of my last job. Every cover letter was a tightrope walk between honesty and spin. I wanted to be genuine, but I didn't want to scare anyone off. The first interview didn't go well. I stumbled over words. My voice cracked when the manager asked about past experience. I felt all the doubt, all the anxiety creeping back, whispering, "You're not good enough. You'll fail again." But I went to another interview the next day, and the next, and the one after that. With each attempt, I felt a little more solid, a little less fragile. I practiced answering questions in front of the mirror, rehearsed greetings, even memorized a few phrases about teamwork and responsibility. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about proving to myself that I could be competent, that I could step into a role without being crushed by fear. Eventually, I landed a new job. A smaller store, quieter, less pressure, but fair. A place where mistakes were met with guidance, not judgment. Where coworkers smiled because they wanted to, not because they were plotting behind my back. The first shift was terrifying. Every beep of the register made my heart jump. Every customer's glance made me flinch. But I kept going, slowly, steadily, and then something unexpected happened. I started to enjoy it, not the way I had deluded myself before with the fake praise or the obsessive cleaning, but genuinely. I learned the routines, memorized the stock, got to know the regulars. A small sense of pride started to creep back, quiet and steady. I even laughed again. Small laughs at first, awkward chuckles when I made a minor mistake. Smiles shared with co-workers, but real. For the first time in months, I realized that confidence wasn't built on avoiding mistakes or pleasing everyone. It was built on showing up, learning, and continuing even when everything inside you wanted to collapse. And slowly, just slowly, I started to trust myself again, because confidence isn't given, it's reclaimed. And every day I worked, every customer interaction, every shelf I straightened with calm hands instead of trembling ones, I reclaimed a little piece of who I was before the lies, before the betrayal, before the collapse. The past wasn't gone. The memories of the old job still haunted me, whispering that I could be crushed again. But I learned something crucial. I could survive. I could rise again. And this time, I was doing it for me, not for fake compliments, not for approval, not for anyone else. Months passed. The new job became a rhythm, a steady heartbeat that replaced the chaos of the old one. I got to know the co-workers, the customers, even the quirks of the inventory system. And while the memories of the old store never left, they stopped being daggers in my chest and became lessons etched into my skin. One afternoon, I passed by the old convenience store. It looked the same, fluorescent lights buzzing, aisles neat, the doorbell jingling as someone walked in. I paused, hand on the handle of my new backpack, and stared for a long moment. I remembered standing there, trembling, fists clenched, fighting shadows I couldn't see. I remembered the phone call that had cut through me like a knife, the fake smiles, the whispers behind my back, the betrayal I'd felt so deeply. But this time, I didn't feel anger. Not really. I felt clarity. I realized something. That place had taught me how strong I could be when I refused to break, how sharp my mind could be when pushed to the edge, and how resilient I truly was. I had survived. And that survival wasn't about perfection or praise, it was about refusing to let lies and manipulation define me. I took a deep breath, turned my back to the store, and walked on. The past didn't have power over me anymore. I had reclaimed it, folded it into my story, and left it there where it belonged. That night, I sat in my room, writing down everything I'd learned. Not just about work, not just about fake smiles or betrayal, but about myself. I wrote, I am not defined by others' lies. I am not broken because someone told me I was. I am capable, I am resilient, and I will continue to grow. For the first time in a long time, I felt a calm satisfaction, not happiness, not triumph, but a sense of completeness. I hadn't won a battle in the traditional sense. I hadn't been crowned Employee of the Month or praised for perfection. But I had won something far more valuable, myself. Life would continue to challenge me. I knew that people would lie, bosses would criticize, mistakes would happen. But I also knew that I could face it all, armed with the knowledge that I had survived something far worse. And that was enough. Because sometimes, survival isn't just making it through the day, it's reclaiming the part of you that thought it was lost forever. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, just breathed. The storm had passed. I was still standing, and that, in itself, was victory. Life isn't about the battles we lose. It's about the strength we find after falling. Every betrayal, every fake smile, every failure is a lesson disguised as pain. What matters isn't that the world tries to knock us down, it's that we rise anyway. You may stumble. You may be misunderstood. You may face people who lie and undermine you. But in the end, the only approval that truly counts is your own. Stand up. Reclaim yourself. Because surviving isn't just making it through, it's discovering that you are stronger than anything that tried to break you.